Well, good morning, Soma. There we go. I like that. I like that. So I got a question for you. Have you ever gone all in on something and then it blows up in your face? Like maybe, for example, I don't know, 18 months ago, you decided that the best place to put your retirement money was in crypto. And you're like, guys, trust me on this. It's going to the moon. And all of a sudden you're like, that's a negative number. That's not what I wanted for retirement. Or maybe like you had these dreams and these hopes and you're like, I'm going to buy this house and we're going to make so many memories there. And you buy the house and then one thing breaks and then another thing breaks and then something really expensive breaks. And you're a year into it and you're like, this is a money pit. Or maybe you took a job somewhere and you're like, you guys, this is going to be the best job. I had 3 job offers, and this was the one I selected, and I just love this company. It's going to be so great. And you join, and you take the job, and then 6 months later, they're like, we need to do some reductions in staff, and you're the new guy. And you thought this job was going to be amazing, and all of a sudden, you're like, what is this? Or maybe you did that thing where you were dating someone and you were just convinced that this was the one. And you tell all your friends, you're like, guys, I'm going to ask her. And the week leading up to it, she sends you a text, hey, we need to talk. And you're like, okay, I went all in. I thought it was going to go one way. And then the reality was something completely different. You went to your dream school and realized that you're in over your head. This is not the program. This is not the major. This is not the thing I thought it was going to be. We've all had those moments where we've gone all in on something and then reality turned out to be completely different than what we'd hoped, expected, and dreamed for. So what do you do in moments where reality and what you imagined are on opposite sides of the room, where they're not even close to each other? It's not even the same ballpark. It's not the same stadium. It's not even the same sport. Reality and your hopes are so far apart. What do you do when you go all in and it blows up in your face? What I want to do today is I want to take a look at the life of Peter. It's a guy that if you read the Bible at all, if you've been around church at all, you come across Peter's name a lot. And sometimes I think he kind of gets a bad rap because they're always like, oh yeah, there's Peter doing something stupid again. But in a lot of ways, we don't get to, think about it this way. If someone were to tell you all the highlight major points of your life, they don't talk about week after week after week of you doing good stuff. That just gets skipped over. It's always like the stuff that stands out. And so for Peter, he sometimes gets like these moments where it's like, okay, there's Peter doing something stupid. So what I want to do is I want to give you a good actual glimpse of Peter. Because I think if we look at the life of Peter, it can set us up well for what do we do when our reality and our hopes and dreams don't line up. And so let me just kind of set the stage here. Let me just give you a little bit of what Peter was like. It starts off in Matthew chapter 4. It says, as Jesus was walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once they left their nets and followed him. Okay, this was not the first time Peter had met Jesus. You know, Jesus had been on the scene for a little bit. Peter had seen him do a few things. There was this moment where Jesus asked Peter to take him out on a boat so he could preach to people. And Jesus did a few miracles where he hauled in a bunch of fish after they'd been fishing all night and hadn't caught anything. And Peter had started to see Jesus around. He's like, okay, there's something about this Jesus that is real. There's something about this Jesus that I want to be a part of. And in this moment, Jesus actually extends an invitation to Peter and his brother and said, hey, I want you to come be a part of what I'm doing. And get this, Peter dropped his nets. That's more significant than it sounds. Peter quit his job as a fisherman to go be a part of what Jesus was doing, okay? This was not just some easy thing to do. He quit his job. We find out later that Peter's actually married. So I don't know how that conversation went when he got home, but he's like, hey, honey, guess what? You know how like most of the time I've been a fisherman and I fish? And she's like, yeah. He goes, now I fish for people. And he's like, I'm sure there was a conversation like, what do you mean you fish for people? Well, you know that guy Jesus that people are like talking about and he's been wandering around? Yeah. He told me to come join him and I'm going to fish for people. And she's like, well, how much does it pay? I don't know. Well, what exactly do you do? I'm going to learn. So is this like a commission-based thing? Like for every person you fish, do you get like, I don't know, but it's going to be good. See, Peter took an amazing leap of faith. He thought he was getting in on the ground floor of something with Jesus. This is a guy who has some commitment here, okay? This was not an easy choice. This wasn't just a whim. He did something that cost him a lot. And as you continue to go through the life of Jesus, you'll see like, okay, other people are starting to take notice. The crowds start to get bigger. There's more people. We know the story of where Jesus fed the 5,000. There's another story where he fed 4,000. We see all these miracles. We see the crowds starting to get larger and larger. We see the reputation increasing. And then we also see moments where things started to go bad, where things started to get hard, where Jesus starts talking about this idea of like, hey, you got to take up your cross and follow me. He has these moments where he says stuff like, you got to drink my blood and eat my flesh. And everyone's like, come again? Say what? And there are these moments where the crowds have peaked and then they start to dwindle and people start to walk away. And in John chapter 6, it says, from this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. And Jesus turns and he looks at the 12 and he says, You don't want to leave too, do you? Jesus asked the 12. And then Simon Peter, our boy, answers him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God. When everybody else was walking away, Peter decides this is the time to double down. This is not a guy who is easily swayed. This is a guy who says, you know what? I know what Jesus is about, and I want to be a part of it. Peter had seen the way life was going. He'd seen the way the conditions of the countryside that he was in. He'd seen the way that Israel was being treated by Rome, and he's like, I want to be a part of something different. And Jesus is talking about this thing called the kingdom. Jesus is talking about a new way of life. Jesus is talking about this day when, people are treated the way that they're supposed to be, where love rules all. He's buying into all of this. He loves it. And even when it gets hard, even when it gets difficult, he chooses to be about what he thinks Jesus is all about. He's gone all in. And then there comes this fateful night where it's at the end of Jesus' life, and he's praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he knows, Jesus knows that he is, just hours away from being tortured and crucified, and he's got his disciples there with him, and they're praying through the night, and all of a sudden, a contingency of Roman guards come in, and they surround Jesus, and they surround the other disciples, and they see Judas, who's just betrayed him and led the guards to him, and Peter thinks this is his moment. He's got, in the background, he's got the soundtrack. He's like, okay, you only get one shot. You get one opportunity, And he's got it playing. He's like, okay, this is what we've been waiting for. This is our chance. We've decided that we're going to overthrow Rome. This is the inauguration of Jesus. This is the inauguration of his kingdom. I've been waiting for this for 3.5 years. I was there when nobody else was even a part of this. I've been here since the beginning. This is my moment. Come on, guys. And what does he do? It says in John chapter 18, and Luke, I'm combining the two stories. He says, then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. So apparently his aim is not that great. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, put your sword away. Shall I not drink of the cup my Father has given me? And he touched the man's ear and healed him. And right here in this moment, Peter's world fractures. Because he had an idea of what life was going to be like. He had gone all in. And he thought the way that Jesus' kingdom was going to come into power was the way literally every other kingdom had ever come into power before. Well, how do you start a new kingdom? You conquer the old kingdom. That's what you do. The new kingdom comes into being by conquering the old one. You cut off the head of the snake, and then you set yourself up. How does one king become king? Well, you get rid of the old king. And Peter knew this. He had all of human history as an example of what this was going to look like. And he'd heard Jesus talk about, my kingdom's going to reign forever. My kingdom's going to rule forever. In his mind, he had an idea of what the future looked like. And he took his moment and he seized it. And Jesus said, sorry, that's not the way this story's going to go. And we've been there. You've been there. You've had a time when you thought, this is how my life is going to go. And all of a sudden, the plans, boom, totally changed. And Peter does not know what to do. This is the part of the story that most of us are more familiar with. In Luke 22, it says, then seizing him, they led him away, talking about Jesus, and took him to the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. He doesn't know what to do. He's like, I was ready to go down fighting. I was ready to go down swinging. Like, I was ready to make this happen, but if I'm not going to fight, what am I going to do? And when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl seated there saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely and said, this man was with him, referring to Jesus. But he denied it. Woman, I don't know him, he said. A little while later, someone else saw him and said, you are also one of them. Man, I am not, Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted, certainly this fellow was with him, for he's a Galilean. His accent has betrayed him. People know the way you talk like all of Jesus people. Peter replied, man, I don't know what you're talking about. Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him, before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. This is the story that we remember about Peter. Peter denies him 3 times, but Peter is in a moment where he doesn't know what to do. Like, if you had said, hey, Peter, you're going to go down swing, and Peter would have been like, I can do that. I'm a fisherman. I grew up on the docks. I can handle myself. I can do this. But when that option was taken away, when that future reality was no longer available, Peter's like, I got nothing. And we remember him right now in a moment of confusion because the old world that he knew isn't actually the world that he's going to be a part of. And he doesn't know what the new future looks like. He's in this limbo in between, okay, I remember what was, I don't know what's going to be, and I don't know what to do. Peter reached a crisis moment in his faith. And for basically the next week, Peter is lost and in limbo. Jesus is crucified and buried, and Peter's not there. In fact, none of the disciples are except for John. He's gone. He's trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do? Like, I thought I was going to be in on something big. I put all of my hopes into this. I put all of my dreams into this. I worked so hard to be a part of it, and it's gone. Jesus is gone. Even after Jesus is resurrected, and they get word, Peter runs to the grave, and he checks it out, and he's like, okay, I guess Jesus is back, but the last time I looked at Jesus and he looked at me, I had just betrayed him 3 times, so I better go somewhere else at this point. And for about a week, like I said, Peter's just trying to figure out life. He encounters Jesus in one place, and I don't know what to do. And finally, about a week later, we get this story of him in John, where it says, afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them, and they said, we'll go with you. So they went out, got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. All right, what is Peter doing here? He's going back to what he knew. I was once a fisherman. I know fishing. I can go back and be a fisherman. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to wonder about it. I can just go back to the way things were, and maybe I can start over. Maybe this whole future following Jesus thing, maybe that's for somebody else, but it's a little too hard for me. It's a little too confusing for me. I'm going to go back to what I know. He does what so many of us do when reality and expectations don't line up. He goes back and he retreats. He goes back and he hides. And guys, can I be completely honest here? That's been our reality, honestly, for the last couple of years. I mean, maybe you have a personal story. Maybe you can just follow the national story of COVID. Maybe you can just kind of take a look around, and I guarantee you remember people that used to be seated here that you're like, where'd they go? They disappeared. And I'm not talking about you guys that are just following online. I'm talking about people who have just disappeared completely, entirely. Because life went one way, and their expectations had pointed in a different direction. And I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just simply saying this is a reality. This is a reality for a lot of people right now. That they are stuck in a moment between what was and what will be, and they don't know where to go, and they don't know what to do. But the story doesn't stop there. So they're out fishing. And early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" Which is kind of mean because he knows they don't. "No," they answered. And then he does something. He does something that he had done once before. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." When they did, they were unable to haul in the net because of the large number of fish. This was one of the first miracles Peter had ever got to see Jesus do back in the day. And all of a sudden, Peter remembers 3.5 years ago, this is what Jesus did. He's doing it again. And so Peter, he doesn't know what's going on, but he's excited now. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, which is John, it's really interesting that when John writes his own book, he refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved, but that's okay, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he'd taken it off. It's getting hot. They're doing manual labor, and he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. It's details like that make me trust the reliability of the Bible. Like, if you're just making up a story, you don't put in, like, it was about 100 yards away. You just tell the story. Sorry, that was just a side. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals with fish on it and some bread. All right, I want to pause for a second right here. Okay. Jesus has just conquered sin, death, shame, guilt, hell, all those things that we sang about, okay? Jesus is at the peak of his godly powers, okay? A new era in life has just started, and what is Jesus choosing to do right now? He's going to feed his friends. Think about the power of that. All of the power of God is contained within Jesus, and he can do anything he wants, and he thinks the best thing he can do right now is share a meal with some people. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." I'm pretty sure he probably put a lot of emphasis into those words. "Yes, Lord." I got to make up for this. I'm being called on the carpet here. Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to them, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus had asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Do you see what Jesus is doing here? I mean, he's not guilting Peter. He's acknowledging that something happened, but he's not making Peter feel guilty about the fact that he didn't know what to do. He's not condemning him for having a bad view of reality or thinking that, hey, Peter, you thought we were going to go down and this was going to be a rumble and we were all going to fight our way to the top. Jesus doesn't say, "Hey, you know what, that was a really bad idea. How could you be so stupid?" He doesn't say anything like that. He just simply says, "Hey, do you love me?" See, Jesus is not only bringing Peter back, he's also pointing Peter forward. He's telling him where the future actually lies. And so there's something really special about this moment. I mean, if you've been around church long enough, you've probably heard where it says, okay, well, Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and then Jesus gives Peter the chance to to restore himself 3 times. For every time you denied me, I'm going to let you reaffirm me. There's something really special about that. But I want to focus in on the other part where Jesus is telling Peter, hey, feed my sheep. Where he keeps telling him, hey, love other people. Because this is where the future actually lies. See, Peter was in limbo, and he's like, I don't know what to do now. I was all in on everything, Jesus. I just don't know what it looks like. And Jesus is in this moment giving Peter a glimpse and a direction for where the future's actually going to go. He's pointing and saying, the direction you need to go involves loving other people. That is what you are called to do, Peter. And if I could extrapolate this and apply it to us, that is what we have been called to do as well. For every person in here that's like, what does my future look like? I have no idea. I can't tell you. But I can tell you that loving other people will always be a part of it. That is who we are called to be as the people of God. And so if you're someone who likes things to be really practical, if you're like, okay, hey, thank you for the story. I'm glad to know about Peter. What am I supposed to go do? All right, let me give you a few things here. Step 1 is simply have breakfast with Jesus. Seriously, have breakfast with Jesus. Make this a regular part of your life. Because there are going to be plenty of times where you are confused, you are stuck, you don't know what to do, and figuring out on your own is not simply an option, because figuring out on your own is what got you to where you are currently. And so I say have breakfast with Jesus on a regular basis. Have breakfast with Jesus when something is going well. Have breakfast with Jesus definitely when things are going poorly. Make a regular habit of having breakfast with Jesus. Now, do I mean literally sit there and put 2 plates down and pretend that someone's eating? No, you don't have to do that. But there's a power in starting your morning or having a time early in your day before things get going where you just simply spend time with Jesus. I love what Jesus tells people in Matthew chapter 11. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus is telling all of us, any who would follow after him, that there's going to be plenty of times where you don't know what to do. Come learn from me. There's going to be plenty of times where you're like, this world is hard. And Jesus is going to reply, yes, it is hard, but I'm gentle. Come spend time with me. And one of the things that I think sometimes we get confused as Jesus followers is we're like, I'm supposed to pray and I'm supposed to read scripture because that's the right thing to do. We treat it like flossing. Like I need to do this because it's the right. No, I mean, it's the right thing to do. Yes, it's also the best thing to do. It's not an arbitrary rule so that we can get Jesus points and so that we can have a great place in heaven one day. It's the way we survive the difficulties of life. It is the way we continue to thrive when everything else around us is dying. Prayer and scripture, time with Jesus, is a balm for our souls. Jesus was not telling people this hey, here's my list of rules, make sure you follow them or you're not in, you don't get to be a part of this. No, he's like, hey, life is hard. We know this. Life is hard. Come be a part of something that's better. Come be a part of something that will give you hope amidst the difficulties. So step 1 is simply have breakfast with Jesus. Step 2 is acknowledge the pain. And here's what I mean by this. Peter had to acknowledge that his dream died. And Jesus had to acknowledge the pain of being betrayed by Peter 3 times. We don't pretend that life isn't hard, okay? The way you get past difficulties in life is not by pretending they don't exist. That just leads to further problems later down the road. We acknowledge the pain. And so for some of you, that means acknowledging, yeah, you're right, that job did not work out. That home was a bust. Your retirement account is now 0. It is, and it hurts. She wasn't the one. He wasn't the one. It did not turn out the way you had hoped. And that hurts. And that's okay. Because it hurt Jesus. It hurt Jesus to be betrayed. I always tell you, I get emotional, and you guys are going to have to bear with me. And so this is your chance to bear with me. But no, like, we all know this. Like, you can go throughout your story and you can find really painful parts. And it's okay to say that that was painful because acknowledging the pain is part of moving into the future. Some of us are stuck because we have not yet acknowledged the fact that our dream died. We're still bitter about it. We're still angry about it. We're still upset about it. And you're not going to move forward as long as you keep failing to acknowledge the pain. Step 3. And by the way, these are not sequential. You can go back and forth between them. You don't have to have breakfast with Jesus and then acknowledge the pain. You can do both at the same time and keep doing it. Step 3 is simply this. Remember who you are. Part of the difficulty of life so many times is that we let somebody else define us. We let something else define us. We let the loss of a job. We let the loss of a spouse. We let the loss of something we put all of our hopes in really define who we are. And Peter, many, many, many years later after this story, writes these words. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who has called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light. This is who you are. This is who we are. Let me say that again. You are a chosen people. We talked about this during communion. You have been chosen by God. You are worthy. You are a royal priesthood. You are someone who is royalty. We are together a holy nation. We are God's special possession. And what is it that we're supposed to do? Declare the praises of him who have called us out of darkness into his wonderful light. Guys, there is a good life out there found in Jesus, and we get the privilege of letting other people know about it. And so I get that life is hard, but we still have a purpose. I get that dreams have died, but there still is a dream that we get to be a part of. And so finally, here's what I just want to simply say to you. Step 4. Go all in with the future God has for you. And here's what I mean by this. There's a couple things here. The good times are going to be different in the future than they were in the past. Some of you guys, as I've gotten to know you and I've gotten to learn your stories and I've gotten to talk to you, told me about the days when Soma first started. And those days don't exist anymore because there's new people in the room and there's things that are different. And there's a opportunity to long for the good old days. And we should remember the good old days and we should celebrate the good old days. But we should also remember that God is doing new things each week. The places will be new. I mean, let's just talk quite literally. In a month, the place will be new. I've already grown to love. I've been here 2 months and I've already grown to love being here. And I'm like, okay, well, what about this new location? Are the floors going to be sticky the same way? Is it going to smell like popcorn, or what's it going to smell like? I kind of really like popcorn. It's one of my go-to snacks, popcorn and ice cream, And so, what is it going to smell like there? Okay, there's the thing that things will be new. And it's always going to include other people. People that we don't know yet, people that we haven't met. I mean, just think about in the life of Peter. Jesus has this conversation with him. And Peter does not know at this moment that he's going to get to be a part of the gospel spreading from just a Jewish culture to literally the whole world. Peter doesn't know that he's going to get to travel around a lot of the Mediterranean rim. He's going to get to go to Rome itself. He's going to get to preach before kings and emperors. He's going to get to tell people all about Jesus. In fact, the fact that most of us are in the room right now and Jesus followers has a lot to do with the fact that Peter made it okay for us. Because there's a big argument in Acts 15. It's like, do people have to become Jewish before they can become Christian? And Peter's like, nope. You can be Christian and not be Jewish. And I'm really glad for that because I did not grow up Jewish. And so for a lot of us, the fact that we are in the room goes back to something that Peter had no idea he was going to be a part of in this moment. All he knew was that the dream he had died. And for you, the words I have for you is if you right now are in a season where your dream has died, yes, absolutely mourn it. I'm not trying to get you to pretend it doesn't hurt. But do remember that God has more for you than you can even imagine, than you can even believe at this moment. There are things that you're going to get to be a part of that God has for you and for us that will change other people's lives. See, the good news about the kingdom of God is that it is ever expanding And the more it expands, the more it fills us up. This is not a situation where, and let me just speak candidly, next week when we merge and there are twice as many people in the room, the temptation is going to be to feel, well, who's going to notice me now? It's hard for me to get noticed already because there's so many people in the room. If it doubles, what's that going to look like? And the good news is that if we do what we are being called to do, to be a holy nation, a royal priesthood, if we do that and live that out, then the more people there are, the more love there is to share, the more love there is to give. And so if you are someone today who has been feeling lonely or left out or not included, join in on what God is doing. God gives us love. He sustains us with love, and then he asks us to share it with others. That is where our future lies. And along the way, yeah, dreams will die. Things will change. Things will look different than the way they did before. But the good news is that God's love never expires. It never goes out of style. It has no end. It expands evermore. This is who we are called to be. And so if you're like, okay, Jeremy, just sum it up for me real quick. What does it mean? I'm just going to repeat what Jesus said. What do we need to do? Feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Feed my sheep. We get to practice that in real time starting next week. And we get to practice that in real time every week thereafter. I don't know what it's going to look like a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I bet it's going to be more than we could ever expect or imagine because that's the God we serve. And if you're in a moment right now where you're like, don't tell me about the future, the present hurts too much, God's there for you. He's there for you in this moment, and he loves you.